So we covered some of this in the Con Safety After Dark video, but I think it's important that we take a deeper dive into sexuality in the fandom and exactly what kind of happens when we take a deeper look into how our fandom looks at sex, treats sex, and generally approaches sex as a topic with other people. Because our fandom is very heavily based on fantasy, things that are not real, things that are concepts of things that could be real, or just generally different traits and things that don't usually happen in real life or are reminiscent of things that happen in real life. Sometimes the line between fantasy and realism can cause some problems. And this will probably get me demonetized, but fuck it. It's time to take a deep dive into sex in the fandom and some of the positives, negatives, and things we should probably take more into account. First, let's talk about some of the things that our fandom tends to be into. We tend to be into things that, are not necessarily real. There are things like inflation, there are people who are avid enjoyers of, like, diapers and stuff, and things that are a little weird to the outside community, which usually leads us into hot water of people thinking that we are all into that. We are not all into that. However, there are some people who are into that, and they practice it pretty safely and, within the bounds of their con room at cons, or they just keep it to themselves or lock it away behind an After Dark account. In these instances, these people are usually practicing it pretty safely, outside of the public eye, and in a way that allows them to enjoy whatever it is they're into without causing too much of a stir. Where this gets tricky, however, is on more public sites where art and other fan fiction or mediums of this idea come to play, and it's a bit more public to people who can access these things and see them. While your average person at a con hopefully isn't running around in their pup gear, although people do. For the most part, the public eye doesn't see it in real life. Where they do, however, see it is on sites like E261 or in video or art content that they can easily access online. Because there are people outside of our community that can easily find and view this content, there are a lot of people who are quick to make assumptions because they have found said content. They don't tend to ask questions, they tend to just see and then assume and then associate. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing that a lot of us share this online, but it is something we should keep in mind when sharing things online. Bear in mind that when you share things like that, you're not always going to have people seeing it in context. A lot of people are not, and a lot of people are going to make quick assumptions that may not necessarily be true. So just bear that in mind when you're sharing your content. Now, another thing that tends to happen in the fandom is the aspect of fantasy bleeding over into reality, and that may not make a lot of sense to a lot of people. But I would like to touch on one specific thing that I do see quite a lot that does tend to impact the way that some of us treat sex in real life based on how we've consumed it in some of this artistic content, mediums, fanfiction, however you want to see it, and has shaped some of our attitudes about it. Now, one type of content that tends to get a little bit hairy when it comes to going from the more fantasy aspect to the more real aspect is certain types of art. Certain types of art that does have aspects that may seem very real or could be real in theory, and kind of toes the line of legality when you actually look at it in the real world. I'm talking about cub porn, I'm talking about feral art, and I'm talking about some of the more dangerous scenarios that some of the art is drawn in. Now, if you're looking at some of these types of art, like, say, cub porn, an outside eye would see cub porn and they'd make a natural association with pedophilia. It may have never been the intention of the artist or the person purchasing the piece of art to make that connection, but someone outside the fandom very easily could. So when you are commissioning that kind of work, it's very, very important to keep that in mind and understand that that is where some of that backlash may be coming from. Similarly, feral art, while your character may look feral and you would rather be a feral creature, if in certain instances it's drawn in such a way that there is an anthro and a feral, that could be very easily misconstrued as bestiality, and very often it is, by the outside eye. not necessarily by the internal eye. Now, I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely some artists that draw outright pedophilia and outright bestiality, but I'll also acknowledge that there are some artists that are just trying to cater to a certain kink that is supposed to be a safe expression, but just keep that in mind when you're putting your art online as well, because outsiders to the fandom are not necessarily going to know that a character is supposed to be drawn that way and it's not just outright bestiality or pedophilia. But kind of playing off the same idea, another thing that tends to happen in our fandom is Murrsuiting. It's a thing, it happens, it's real, and there's really not that much wrong with it. It's just how some people prefer to engage in activities like that. And for a while, or at least for a time when I first joined the community, there was this very negative perception of Murrsuiters, who they were, and I did see a very big call to arms from certain people trying to figure out who they were and expose them. This is highly problematic on a number of levels. Now, if you are someone safely engaging in activities, in a way that is a bit different from the norm, but is still approached in a safe and, encouraging way, that's wrong. You should not be going on a witch hunt for Murrsuiters, even if it's something that you genuinely do not like. Now, I do understand that some people who make fursuits do get very upset when their suits are turned into Murrsuits, because it is a piece of their art that is being used for a more perverse purpose than they had initially intended, and a lot of suit makers very clearly state that they do not want their suits to be used for that, or will not make additions to their suits so they can be used for that. And while that is completely valid and I understand the gripes there, trying to go out and expose anyone who Murrsuits because they are deviants or terrible people is wrong and extremely problematic and should not be done, frankly. These people are engaging in safe sexual activities for the most part, and are enjoying what they get out of the fandom in a way often that is not in the public eye, is not making us look bad, and is just something that they find gratifying. So to go out and chase them is wrong. Not only that, but then trying to go and expose these people is a massive, massive breach of personal privacy and should not be something that is endorsed in any way. While I myself do not use any of my suits for those activities, I don't see anything wrong with people who do. I think it's a perfectly healthy way to explore that side of your sexual interest, and you should not be shunned in it. In a community that likes a lot of weird shit, that's not the weirdest shit that you can be into, and quite frankly, if you're doing it safely in a way that makes you happy, do you, and screw everyone else. Now, a more subtle way that some of these fantasy aspects make their way into real life is just straight sex. Just how it's done, who does it, and where it's done. This may seem a bit weird to some, but essentially the idea of, sexualities that are most common or most prevalent or preferred in some cases, the way sex is looked at and the way it's portrayed. I'm basically talking about safe sex and condoms and, boundaries and how we really go to practice it. I would say most furries are avid keepers of safe sex in the sense of consent and, cleaning toys and being really good about certain aspects there. But I found in my personal experience that it's a bit more rare that some people in the fandom go back to basics on this one. From my anecdotal experience, viewing a lot of content online, either through following AD accounts or consuming content on certain websites, yeah, I do look at porn. Surprise, shock, gasp now. I don't see a lot of condoms, which is weird, because you would think in a community that, is pretty accepting and pretty open-minded that, just a condom wouldn't really be something that would cause much of an issue, but I don't see a lot of content with condoms. And I don't just mean art. I mean certain people who do those videos and, have actual real-life content that they're putting out there. I don't see condoms to such a degree that it does very much concern me and makes me kind of wonder how the fandom really views safe sex and those practices. Now, one reason there may not be a lot of condoms involved, at least from what I've observed, could be that it's still the old thought of condoms are really just used for pregnancy, which, if a lot of the content that comes out and the content that is put on the internet is overwhelmingly male on male, pregnancy, not really an issue unless it's someone in transition, and even then, it's probably not something that people are actively thinking about. However, you should. While condoms are great for preventing pregnancy, they're also great for preventing STDs and sexually transmitted issues, is how I like to state them. Now, I want to say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with having an STD or an STI. Yeah, there, I said it. There's nothing wrong with it. Where there's a problem is when there is not open communication and people are not practicing safely. And this is something I feel extremely strong about. While it may seem embarrassing or kind of a mood killer to ask someone, if they're safe, if, they have anything, if, you should be aware of anything going forward, in my mind, it's a lot less awkward to have the conversation up front than to get a call a few months later from a partner that, got something. That sucks. So at least from my perspective, I don't see enough condoms being used in the fandom, and I would really like to fix that. Okay, Rage, but why so many condoms? I mean, people are honest, people are safe, and don't people just, tend to group up and, know their friends and have, safe interactions? Most of the time, yeah. But you also have to take into account that a lot of our community is very openly polyamorous. People may be in committed relationships, but, from experience, there are some of those that like to invite other people into the experience, and sometimes you know that person, and sometimes you don't really know that person. Sometimes you know that person, but that person may be ashamed to admit something, and then sometimes you may not know that person at all, and it's just a cute suit huff you want to invite them in. Please try to practice safe sex when being in that situation, because it is just such an easy way for things to go wrong if you don't have the discussion, or if they're not feeling very talkative, or they're afraid to say something because of how it may be perceived. In my experience outside of the fandom, most people don't honestly openly talk about that kind of thing for a very massive fear of shunning. In the furry community, we are used to being shunned just for liking anthros, for liking fursuits, for liking some really weird kinks, but the one thing we should not feel ashamed of is having safe conversations around sexuality to really go about the sex in a safe and positive way. We've got enough stuff to feel shunned and shamed about. That should not be one of them. Now that brings me to who I wish would be the sponsor for this video, but I don't know that they ever would, but I'm going to shout them out anyway. Bad Dragon. I've made a lot of jokes about Bad Dragon. I've kind of poked some fun at Bad Dragon, but something you may not know is Bad Dragon has probably the most fair prices on condoms that I, as a New Yorker, have ever run into. Someone noticed on my live stream the other night that I had a Bad Dragon hoodie on. I love the fact that Bad Dragon keeps their prices on, condoms to help you stay safe in the bedroom pretty reasonable and pretty low compared to what an average New York price would be. So I have no problem rocking that hoodie out in public, because while most people associate them with fantasy toys and things to satisfy kinks, while I've definitely considered things like that on their site for me has been a huge positive for just getting the tools I need to be safe in my After Dark activities. So kudos to you, Bad Dragon. Keep doing you. Anyway, thanks for joining me on this quick podcast After Dark discussion on something I feel pretty strongly about, and there'll be more of these coming, I promise. This is just something I wanted to do quick and easy, and I know it's not a dedicated video, but if you guys like this, let me know in the comments, and I'll plan to do a few more. Alright, bye! Me to say, this is my home.
forward.